373, Women, Law, and Public Policy, which I highly recommend to everyone. And you've been teaching me about my rights as I slowly watch them fade away. So I get to learn about them and then kiss them goodbye. One thing that's happened while I've been in your class is that you taught us about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and basically the very next week or 2 weeks later, she passed away. So we learned all about this, and then suddenly she was gone. And you acknowledged in your lecture, and I was hoping you could tell us here now just a little bit about the debate within both the law community and that the general public had in reaction to her legacy.
Yeah, so I think that most law professors recognize that she's one of the few Supreme Court justices who had a career that would earn her a place in the history books. Her work with the ACLU Women's Rights Project was so important and a significant advance for women in many areas. I once presented a paper in front of her, and she stood up at the end and it was about the 19th Amendment. She commented to the crowd of law professors, you should go visit the Sewell Belmont House in DC, where their organization was, housed, and they're such brave women that we should pay attention to their legacy. So she had a sense of herself as being one part of a chain, and she was just one link. But I think that, something that people are debating now is, among law professors, is should she have retired in 2013 before the midterm election so that President Obama would have an opportunity to, he could have appointed someone earlier. Rebecca Traister argues it should never have come down to her. The entire fate of constitutional democracy should never rest with one person.
I think that's a pretty shared sentiment among a lot of people on the left. People have said it shouldn't have come down to this woman who is deep in her 80s, who had beaten cancer twice. And so there have been discussions about adding more seats to the court. What's the precedent? What are the ramifications of then having more seats or 10 seats on the court?
Yeah, just adding one probably wouldn't make sense because you would have evenly divided votes. There are so many different proposals out there. It's not even just packing the court as an accurate description of some of the proposals that are out there. So we'll have to see. I do think that what's occurring today is unprecedented in the sense that early voting is now a more common phenomenon in this election compared to previous elections. And so we're looking at a week where there could be a confirmation of a justice after 50 million people have voted. So, there are different responses to this, and I'm sure there are going to be debates about it, but it doesn't necessarily involve packing the court. It can involve something consistent with the Constitution that will impose a term of 18 to 20 years, and they wouldn't force retirement because you can't do that under Article 3, but they would have the justices go to senior status and start hearing lower court cases. And that would allow more regularity for presidents to ensure that they each have an opportunity to appoint one or two justices.
Quick question. So just because you mentioned the upcoming nomination, which is going to be next Monday. And so you kind of talked a little bit about how the situation might be unique. What is Amy Coney Barrett a unique nominee in any way? Or is there anything about her that kind of is different from past nominations?
I would say that she's in, a fairly mainstream position as a Scalia acolyte. And so if you like Scalia, she's very similar to that. I also thought it was very striking when Senator Cory Booker asked her to comment on some previous testimony that she had made about the sentencing guidelines. And he had asked her as a follow-up question, what recent articles or books she had read in the past year that commented on racial inequalities in the criminal justice system. And she could not name a single one.
A lot of people are worried with Amy Coney Barrett becoming a judge that Roe v. Wade will be overturned. And as a result, I think a lot of women, also with President Trump in office, a lot of women have joked around about getting IUDs or long-term birth control? Should people really lean towards long-term birth control because it's their birth control so at stake?
Mm-hmm. Well, a lot of, I saw some articles about this when Trump entered office. People were discussing doing this. But, I think one thing to keep in mind is access to contraception is already under attack. And there are cases about the Affordable Care Act and the ACA that deal with religious and now moral exemptions, requests for exemptions from the contraceptive mandate in there. So that employers wouldn't have to include contraceptive coverage in their healthcare. And the court has already endorsed this over Ruth Bader Ginsburg's dissents.
So you teach SPIA 373, and there are about 60 plus students in the class, I would say. And I'm just curious, who would you say is your favorite student in the entire class?
Well, apart from you.
Okay.
And I thought it was so endearing after, we were just talking, we just met Ruth Bader Ginsburg and now we've lost her. In that class, I would have to say, whenever I teach a class like this, the male students who take the class, I think it's important, and I often wonder why more wouldn't take a class like this. I mean, these are issues that are going to affect half of our country going forward. So these are obviously important public policy issues. And so, I cheer on any male student who enters the class and expresses interest in studying these subjects, because it's important for everyone.
Do you notice a difference in the environment of the class when it's so heavily majority female? Is there a difference in kind of the class culture?
I would just say the level of engagement in this class is unusually high for the students. And I think they're thinking about, it's not purely academic for them. And our office hours are booked for the entire semester. So people are coming in, to discuss, they have a lot to say and they're thinking through a lot of issues.
Oh God, I have to set aside other meetings then. I didn't know that for the rest of the semester.
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering, from your research into kind of citizen advocacy and especially the passage of the 19th Amendment, I was wondering if you have a perspective on how everyday people can best advocate for legal causes or kind of causes otherwise that they care about.
The person that I feature in my book is Alice Paul, who led the more radical wing of the movement. That they engaged in nonviolent disobedience. They really kept up the pressure during World War I to try to convince President Woodrow Wilson to do more. Alice Paul's methods worked, so disruptive protest works, it keeps things in the news. She was unrelenting. And, I think that's a lesson to take away from this. But there are also cautionary tales. And one of them is, she was not willing to pay sufficient attention, or acknowledge what would happen to African-American women in states where there were, Jim Crow restrictions on the right to vote. And she didn't have a concept of intersectional organizing, so that she recognized these were also problems for women's equality. She would describe this as a race problem, and that's not our focus.
And okay, so we're about to get into our game, but I have one more question before we do, because I've seen you have a manuscript under review for a book, or Taming the Rights Revolution. And I was hoping maybe you could tell us a little bit about it.
So this is a book about lawsuits for constitutional accountability. And the specific type of lawsuit that I focus on is called constitutional torts litigation. Mm-hmm. A lot of these cases involve lawsuits against actors like police officers for damages when they violate your rights. I will say that, for all of the recent debate about police violence and the lack of accountability for police officers, I never expected, when I started the research in the Library of Congress in 2013, that these debates, which I thought were sort of arcane about qualified immunity, would be on signs, in this summer I found friends from other parts of the country who sent me signs of protesters saying end qualified immunity. So I'm putting one of those in the book because, you know, I think that if Democrats are in charge of the House, the Senate, and the White House, this is an opportunity to really reshape the framework for constitutional litigation in this country.
Okay, so we're gonna move on to our game section,
Okay.
which is a would you rather. Given this moment in history, we wanted to ask you a would you rather game regarding Amy Coney Barrett and various other candidates. The very first one, would you rather Amy Coney Barrett or Antonin Scalia?
Well, it's hard to say because he's a known and she has some unknowns. I would probably say Scalia. I prefer my known adversaries, yes.
I have an equally difficult one. Amy Coney Barrett or Mr. Rogers?
That's so easy, Mr. Rogers. I love Mr. Rogers.
Amy Coney Barrett or Chrissy Teigen?
Okay, she's married to John Legend, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I love her. She's very witty. You know, I guess her. Chrissy Teigen.
She plays a judge on the now extinct Quibi show, Chrissy.
Amy Coney Barrett or Elle Woods?
Well, Elle Woods completely. She would be very good at her job, I'm sure, and dress well.
Amy Coney Barrett or Albus Dumbledore? J.K. Rowling did say that Dumbledore is gay, if that means anything for you.
And he's wise.
And he's
so maybe
wise.
Dumbledore.
Disregard his author. He's a great character.
And finally, Amy Coney Barrett or Lynda Dodd?
But of course, I agree with myself, so I would endorse myself.
Well, thank you so much.
All-nighters endorsement.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, thank you so much.
Absolutely. It carries a lot of weight, so bear the burden wisely.
And if I could encourage everyone to vote, please vote. Your vote matters.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Have a
you.
great rest of your day.